I was 61 when my daughter's husband told me I could start paying rent or I could leave. He said it from the recliner in the den, the brown one with the cracked armrest, the one he treated like a throne, after he lost his job and started spending his afternoons with the television on and his phone tilted low in his hand. It was early spring in Tacoma, still damp enough that the windows held a grey film by late afternoon. I remember the smell of tomato soup on the stove. I remember the dishwasher humming. I remember my granddaughter's sneakers by the back door, one tipped sideways, untied. And I remember the exact tone he used. Not angry, not embarrassed, not even apologetic, just practical, as if he were discussing a utility bill. "We're short this month, Marianne. You live here. It's time you start contributing properly." Properly. That was his word. My daughter, Lila, was standing at the kitchen counter, wiping down a surface that was already clean. She didn't look at me when he said it. That mattered more than the sentence itself. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Later, I realized that moment mattered more than I understood. Some people mistake silence for permission. That was his mistake. And for a while, if I'm honest, it had been mine too. I didn't answer right away. The soup bubbled once behind me. Somewhere upstairs, a drawer opened and closed. My grandson was singing something to himself, off-key and content. The kind of little sound children make when they still believe the house around them is safe. Then I said, very calmly, "No." He looked up like he hadn't expected that answer. The room did something strange after that. It didn't explode. No shouting, no slammed hands. It just went still. That is often how a real line gets crossed. Quietly. In a room where everyone knows what just happened, and nobody wants to name it first. Lila finally turned and said, "Mom, maybe we should just talk through what's fair." Fair. That was another word people like to use when they want something they have not earned. I set the ladle down beside the stove. "I cook here," I said. "I pick up the kids. I fold laundry. I buy groceries. I pay for my medication. I've already talked through what's fair." Dean, my son-in-law, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "That's not the same as paying your way." I remember noticing then that he was wearing my late husband's old flannel shirt. Not because he missed him. Not because it meant anything. Just because it was there, and it fit well enough. He had a habit of taking things that were not his, and wearing them as if they had always belonged to him. Lila said nothing. That was the missing authority signal, not the law, not paperwork. Just the simplest form of authority there is in a family. A daughter saying, "You will not speak to my mother that way." When that didn't come, something in me cooled. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I turned off the burner, covered the soup, and said, "I'm going out to pick up my prescription." Dean gave a small shrug, as if the conversation had merely paused. I took my keys from the ceramic bowl by the door. My car was still mine. Paid off years earlier. Registration in my name. Insurance in my name. One of the last clean lines left in my life. On the drive to the pharmacy, I kept thinking about a sentence I had seen months earlier on a page I had not paid enough attention to. My pension deposit authorization, shared account access for convenience. That was how it had been explained to me. Convenience. I had not liked the word then either. But I had been tired, my ankle was still healing, and my daughter had said, "It just makes things easier." Mom. By the time I pulled into the pharmacy lot, I knew one thing clearly. I was not going to argue my dignity in a kitchen where everyone had already decided what I was worth. I was going to proceed. I wish I could say the trouble started that day, but it didn't. Trouble almost never begins with the line people remember. It starts in small, ordinary places and builds so gradually that, by the time you name it, it has already rearranged the room. The first memory that came back to me later was from Sacramento, years earlier. when Lila showed up at my door with a 2-year-old on her hip and mascara dried in the corner of one eye. It was August, and the heat had settled into the porch boards. I had just watered the geraniums. She stood there with a duffel bag and said, "Just for a week or two, Mom." I took the baby, Abby, because children should not have to stand in adult weather any longer than necessary. She smelled like sunscreen and crackers. Lila walked in behind me and only started crying after I handed her a glass of water. That was always her way. She held herself together until someone made room for her to fall apart. "Stay as long as you need," I told her, and I meant it. The second memory was from 3 years later, in my kitchen, the old one in the rental duplex after I sold the family house. It was November, and rain tapped the window over the sink in that flat, steady way Northern California rain sometimes does. Dean was new then, charming in the polished, easy way some men are when they are still auditioning. He was slicing pie and smiling at me like he belonged in photographs. He said, almost casually, "So what did your place sell for?" I laughed at first because it seemed rude to answer seriousness with seriousness. "Enough," I said. He smiled without smiling. Smart. Equity's everything now. The coffee had gone slightly bitter on the burner. I remember that taste whenever I think of him. Not terrible, just off enough that you notice it if you are paying attention. The third memory was from the year I moved in with them after I fell on the back steps outside my apartment in Tacoma. It had been drizzling, and I was carrying 2 reusable grocery bags, trying not to slip on the painted edge of the stair. My ankle twisted under me with a clean, shocking pain. Later, in urgent care, while a nurse wrapped the joint and spoke too brightly, Lila sat beside me and squeezed my hand. "You can't stay alone like this," she said. "Come stay with us until you're better." At the time, I believed the sentence exactly as it was offered. Families take care of each other. That was the line. Dean carried my suitcase upstairs when I first arrived. The guest room had a sloped ceiling and one narrow window looking toward the neighbor's cedar fence. Lila cleared a drawer for me. Abby left a note on the pillow in purple marker. "Welcome, Grandma." The room smelled faintly of dryer sheets and fresh wall paint. I remember standing there with my cane in one hand and thinking I would stay 6 weeks at most. What I did not understand then was that dependence, even temporary dependence, changes the way some people sort you in their minds. Those memories came back to me in pieces as the pressure grew. After the argument in the den, I returned from the pharmacy 40 minutes later and found my suitcases by the front door. 2 of them, mine, packed. I stood there holding the small white prescription bag and looking at them as if they belonged to someone else. The blue suitcase still had the baggage tag from a trip I had taken with my husband to Flagstaff years ago. I had never removed it because he liked seeing proof that we had gone somewhere together, besides work, school events, and hardware stores. Lila was nowhere in sight. The television was on. I could hear it, muffled from deeper in the house. I knocked once on the half-open den door and said, "What is this?" Dean appeared first. He did not open the front door fully. He just stood in the hallway, where the light from the kitchen cut across one side of his face. "If you're not willing to contribute," he said, "then this arrangement isn't working." Behind him, I saw Lila at the edge of the kitchen. She looked exhausted. Not guilty exactly. Not yet, just tired enough to let the wrong person lead. I waited for her to say something. She didn't. That's when everything changed. I picked up my prescription bag and set it on top of the suitcase handle. "All right," I said. Dean blinked. "All right?" Yes. I think he expected pleading, or negotiation, or one of those long, draining conversations where a woman starts defending every hour of labor she has done until the room grows tired of her effort, and somebody says, "See? We talked it out." Instead, I checked that my wallet and keys were still in my purse and said, "I'll collect the rest later." Lila finally spoke. "Mom, don't make this bigger than it already is." I turned and looked at her. I'm not the one who made it small. I don't know if she understood me then. Maybe not. I loaded the bags into my trunk myself. The sky had started to mist. The air smelled like wet mulch and cold pavement. Across the street, a motion light blinked on and off. Somebody's dog barked once. Nobody intervened. Most humiliations are private that way, even when they happen in full view. I drove to my friend Carol's house, because Carol had once said, years earlier, over weak tea and pound cake, "If your life ever tilts sideways, don't be noble. Come straight here." She opened the door before I knocked. I must have looked worse than I realized, because she didn't ask what happened. She took one suitcase handle from me and said, "Guest room's made up." The sheets in that room smelled like lavender detergent. There was a lamp with a crooked shade and a stack of library books on the dresser. I sat on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on and listened to the pipes in the wall settle. For the first time all day, I let myself think in complete sentences. They had moved my belongings to the door before I got home. That meant the decision had been made together. I lay back on top of the blanket without changing clothes. Around 10:30, maybe closer to 11, Carol tapped lightly and came in with tea. "You don't have to tell me tonight," she said. I took the mug from her. Chamomile, stronger than I would have made it. "I need my paperwork," I said. She nodded once. "Then tomorrow we start there." That was the procedural pivot. Not dramatic, just clean. The next morning I woke before dawn. Carol's guest room had one of those thin curtains that turns streetlight into a yellow blur. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered the suitcases, the hallway, Lila's silence. I sat up and made a list on the back of a grocery receipt I found in my purse. Bank, pension, mail, medical folder, will, account access. My handwriting was steadier than I felt. By 9:30, we were at my bank branch on Pearl Street. The young man at the desk, Evan, had the careful manner people use with older women when they are not sure whether to be helpful or overly simple. I told him I needed to remove all secondary access from every account connected to my name and retirement income. He looked up then. Really looked up. "All access?" he asked. "Yes." He clicked twice, stopped, and turned his screen slightly away from the open lobby. "Do you believe anyone may attempt to use your funds without authorization?" There it was, the first calm institutional question. No outrage, no sympathy performance. "Just classification." "Yes," I said. "I do." His whole tone changed. He printed forms. He lowered his voice. He explained the difference between view-only access and transactional access, between beneficiary status and authorized user status. He asked whether I wanted verbal password notes added to the account. I said yes. The paperwork already had my name on it. That phrase landed harder than it should have. There is something unsettling about seeing your life reduced to fields and checkboxes, but there is something comforting too. Procedure does not care who cried last night or who thinks you owe them gratitude. Procedure cares about signatures, permissions, dates, and scope. I signed 2 forms, then a third. After that came the pressure beat. My phone buzzed. Lila, then again, then Dean. I turned the phone face down on the desk. Evan pretended not to notice, which I appreciated. "You may also want to open a new transfer-only account for incoming benefits," he said. "Just to create separation." "Yes," I said. "Do that." He nodded. Smart. From the bank, we drove to a law office downtown, one I had used years earlier after my husband died. The attorney's name was Judith Mercer. She wore grey slacks, low heels, and had the expression of a woman who believed disorder could usually be corrected if people would stop talking around the facts. Her office smelled like paper, toner, and lemon hand cream. I sat across from her and explained that I wanted to revoke any powers previously granted, review beneficiary designations, and update my estate plan. Judith listened without interrupting. At one point, she only asked, "Did you ever sign a durable power of attorney in your daughter's favor?" "I think so," I said. "After the ankle injury, hospital paperwork, then follow-up forms later." She opened a file drawer, found my old folder, and turned 3 pages. "Yes," she said. "You did." The lawyer looked up and paused. That small pause mattered. Not because it was dramatic, but because it meant I was no longer working from instinct. I had confirmation. "We revoke this immediately," she said. "Today." Dean called again while I was still in her office. That was the social lane pressing in while the financial lane tightened. I let it ring. Judith slid a yellow tab onto one document. "Do you want to leave anything to your daughter directly?" I looked out her office window at the parking garage across the street. For a moment, all I could see was Lila at 28, standing in my kitchen with Abby on her hip, saying, "Just for a week or two, Mum." Then I said, "No, I want my granddaughter protected. Structured disbursement. Age threshold. No parental control." Judith nodded, as if I had asked for an extra copy of a deed. "That can be done." I left her office with a folder under my arm and a strange feeling in my chest that was not triumph and not grief. It was more like alignment, like vertebrae settling back into place. That afternoon, the first countermove came. Lila sent a text. "Mum, I heard from the bank. Why would you do this without talking to me?" Without talking to me. There are sentences people use that contain their own confession if you read them slowly enough. I did not answer. Instead, Carol and I drove past my former apartment building so I could speak to the manager there about whether any mail still arriving under my name could be held. The manager, a woman named Teresa, with bright red reading glasses on a chain, checked her clipboard and said, "We've had 3 pieces this week already. Please hold everything," I said. "I'll submit forwarding by tonight." She nodded. "No problem." There was a man in the laundry room behind her, arguing softly on speakerphone with an insurance company. I could smell bleach and overheated lint. Ordinary life. That helped. It reminded me the world had not split open because one family had mistaken access for ownership. By the 3rd day, the split in escalation had become very clear. Financial lane first. Judith called to tell me the revocation notices were in process. The new trust draft was ready for review, and the beneficiary changes had been sent to the retirement administrator. "There may be lag time," she said, "but legally the direction is clear." Then social lane. Abby texted me from her tablet. "Grandma, are you okay?" "Mom says you needed space." I sat with that for a while before answering. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I needed quiet. I love you." A minute later, she wrote back, "I miss your pancakes." I had to set the phone down after that because grief is easier to manage when adults misbehave in abstract categories. The minute a child says something simple and true, the whole thing comes into focus. On Friday morning, Carol and I went to look at a small 1-bedroom apartment near Ruston Way. It was above a dental office. Older building. Beige carpet. Narrow balcony. Heat that clicked on with a sound like someone tapping a pipe with a spoon. The property manager, Miss Alvarez, wore a navy cardigan and carried a ring of keys large enough to anchor a boat. She opened the door and said, "It's not fancy, but it's quiet." Quiet was exactly what I wanted. The unit smelled faintly of fresh paint and old wood. Afternoon light came through the blinds in narrow gold bands. The kitchen cabinets had been painted over too many times, but they closed properly. The bathroom tile was clean. There was a small space by the window where I could already imagine a chair and a lamp and a stack of library books that belonged only to me. "I'll take it," I said. "Miss?" Alvarez looked mildly surprised. "You don't want to think about it?" "No," I said. "I've done enough thinking. Financial lane. Application fee. Deposit. Lease review. Utility setup. Direct debit. In my name only. Social lane. When I returned to Carol's that evening, there was an envelope taped to her front door with my name on it in Lila's handwriting. Inside was a letter, not an apology. Not yet, more a document of discomfort. She wrote that families were under pressure, that Dean had been stressed, that the kids missed me, and that she hoped I understood no one had meant for things to go so far. No one had meant for things to go so far. I read that sentence twice. Then I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Meaning is not the measure. Action is. The next week moved in alternating tracks. I signed the apartment lease Monday morning. Miss Alvarez initialed every page with a tidy blue pen. Rent's due on the 1st, she said. Maintenance requests go through the portal, but if your sink bursts, call me directly. Her tone was so matter-of-fact it nearly made me laugh. Imagine that. A grown arrangement between adults. Rules stated plainly. No emotional hostage-taking wrapped around the thermostat. By noon, the electric account was in my name. That afternoon, Dean left me a voicemail. Marianne, I think this has gotten out of hand. We should be able to talk about this like family. Like family. He had not discovered a conscience. He had discovered separation of access. I deleted the voicemail, but not before listening twice, because tone can be its own evidence. The first time he sounded annoyed. The second time, uncertain. Tuesday was moving day. If you can call 2 suitcases, 4 boxes, a lamp, and 1 framed photograph moving. Carol helped me carry things in. The upstairs neighbour, a retired postal worker named Ron, held the building door with one hand and said, "Take your time." That threshold catches wheels. There are kindnesses so small they almost escape notice. Then, later, they become evidence that the world is still intact. I put my husband's photo on the bedroom windowsill. Then I arranged my medication in the bathroom cabinet, 1 bottle at a time, labels facing outward. Structure first. Comfort after. That evening Abby called. "Can I come see your new place?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want to say yes, but because children are often sent ahead of adult motives. "Do you want to come?" I asked, "or do your parents want you to come?" There was a pause. "I want to." "All right," I said. Saturday, around 11. That was the social lane opening on my terms. Wednesday morning, Judith called. "The trust is finalized," she said. "Restricted distribution at 25, no parental authority. Also, one more thing. Your prior joint emergency contact arrangement with your daughter at the clinic can be removed if you want." "Yes," I said. "Please remove it. Institutional tightening begins in tiny places, not a dramatic freeze, not a courtroom scene. Just permissions narrowing until other people can no longer step through doors they assumed would stay open." Thursday, Lila called from an unknown number. I answered because I was tired of guessing. "Mum," she said too quickly, "I didn't know you'd change everything. I changed what belonged to me. That makes it sound like we were trying to take something." I stood at my fire, kitchen counter, looking at the tea kettle before I answered. "Weren't you?" Silence. Then Dean panicked. "No," I said. Dean calculated. Then he panicked when the calculation stopped working. She started crying quietly, the way she used to when she was young, and trying not to let anyone hear through the bathroom door. That pulled at me. Of course it did. She was still my daughter, but sympathy is not the same as reversal. "I'm not discussing this at hallway level," I said. "If you want to apologize, do that plainly. If you want access, the answer is no." She inhaled sharply. "You don't have to be cold." "I'm not cold," I said. "I'm clear." That was the line that settled something in me. Saturday, Abby came alone except for Lila dropping her off at the curb. She was 12 by then, all knees and careful observation, carrying a backpack heavier than she needed for a 4-hour visit. When I opened the apartment door, she looked past me first, taking everything in. The small sofa, the balcony plant I had bought from the grocery store clearance rack, the pie cooling on the counter. "It smells like cinnamon," she said. "It should," I told her. "I made pie." She walked in slowly, then smiled. "This place feels peaceful." I almost cried at that, but there are moments when crying would make a child feel responsible for your feelings. And I had no intention of doing that to her. So I said, that was the idea. We rolled dough together. She told me about school, a science project, a girl who lied badly, and a teacher who wore too much floral perfume. The ordinary details soothed me. Halfway through cutting apples, she said, without looking up, "Mom says everything got complicated." I handed her the bowl of sugar. Sometimes complicated is a nicer word for wrong. She nodded, as if she had expected that answer. Then she said, "I thought what he said to you was mean." I stopped moving for a second. "What did you hear?" I asked. "Enough. Children do. More than adults think. Less than they deserve." I set the knife down. "You don't have to carry grown-up conclusions," I told her. "Just remember this one thing. Kindness is real, but it is not the same thing as letting people use you." She looked at me very steadily. "I know." That's when the room went quiet. Not because anyone had shouted, because a child had said aloud what every adult had been stepping around. After she left that afternoon, I stood at the sink washing pie plates and realized I was no longer waiting for the next blow. My nervous system had begun to trust the walls around me. That night, Dean sent one final message. "We can work this out if you stop making everything legal." I stared at that sentence until I laughed. Softly, but still. Everything legal. As if legality was some theatrical flourish I had added to embarrass him. Instead of the most basic adult framework there is for moments when courtesy fails. You can't take what was never yours. That was the turning point line, though I didn't send it to him. I only said it aloud in my own kitchen, just once, to hear how true it sounded. By the third week, the consequences were fully visible. Judith informed me that all prior authority instruments had been revoked and acknowledged. My clinic portal was updated. Emergency contacts changed. Retirement deposits redirected. Trust recorded. Will executed. Financial lane tightening, then social lane. Lila wrote me an actual letter this time. No defensiveness, no broad language about stress. Just one page. I should have stopped him. I saw what was happening and let it continue. I am ashamed of that. I read it twice at the table with my glasses halfway down my nose and a bowl of soup cooling beside me. The apartment was quiet, except for the refrigerator motor clicking on and off. Outside, someone was dragging a wheeled trash bin to the curb. There it was, not a fix, not redemption, but recognition. That matters. I did not answer immediately. Forgiveness given too early can become a reopening rather than a healing. I wanted to be careful. The following Tuesday, Miss. Alvarez knocked on my apartment door to tell me a package had arrived downstairs because the carrier could not read the unit number. It was a small box from Abby. Inside was a refrigerator magnet, shaped like a lighthouse, and a folded note. "For your new kitchen, so you have something cheerful." I stood there in my socks by the counter and smiled so suddenly my face hurt. Normal life returns in fragments. A magnet. A library card with a new address. The freedom to set the thermostat without commentary. A grocery receipt that belongs only to you. Tea made at the exact strength you prefer. About a month after I moved, Lila came by in person. No Dean. Just Lila. Standing outside my door in a light raincoat, looking older than she had 6 weeks earlier. I let her in. We sat at the table. I poured tea because offering tea is not surrender. Sometimes it is simply proof that your manners survived what your trust did not. She turned the mug between her hands and said, "He kept saying it was practical, that everyone contributes, that you had money sitting there while we were struggling, and I knew it was wrong, but I was tired all the time, and I let the loudest person in the room define what was normal." I listened. Then I said, "That's how a lot of damage gets done." She nodded and cried quietly. Not theatrically, not for effect. Just enough to tell me the truth had finally reached her in full. "I'm not asking to go back," she said. "I know that." Good, I thought, because we were not going back. What I said was, "If you want a relationship with me, it will have to be one that recognizes boundaries as real." "I know." I looked at her for a long moment. "And Dean is never to discuss my finances again. Not indirectly, not by message, not through the children." Not once. Her face changed then, not wounded, relieved. Because a clean rule, even a hard one, is easier to live with than endless emotional weather. "I understand," she said. After she left, I washed the cups, wiped down the table, and opened the balcony door for air. The sky over Tacoma was pale and low, the color of folded newspaper. Somewhere down the block, a car alarm chirped twice and stopped. My scarf was drying on the back of a chair. Abby's lighthouse magnet held her note firmly in place on the fridge. Some people mistake silence for permission. Near the end of all this, I understood the echo of that thought more clearly. Silence is not permission. It is often just the pause before a woman decides to put structure back where disorder thought it could live indefinitely. That was the real resolution, not revenge. Not humiliation returned in kind. Just structure, access corrected, documents updated, space reclaimed, terms made plain. And once the terms were plain, everyone else had to reorganize themselves around reality. These days, my life is very small in the best possible way. I make tea in the morning and drink the first half standing by the window. I volunteer twice a month at the library resale shelf. Abby visits when she wants to, and sometimes we bake, and sometimes we don't. Lila calls on Sundays more often than not. We are building something slower now, something less sentimental and more honest. Dean has remained where he belongs in my life, outside the perimeter. I don't hate him. Hate is too intimate for a man like that, but I am no longer available for his version of reason. And if stories about quiet boundaries resonate with you, you're welcome to stay. I think that's what I learned in the end. Not that family cannot fail you, it can. Not that paperwork solves everything, it doesn't. But truth has a way of settling when it is given a structure to rest inside. No one raises their voice in this apartment. No one tells me what I owe to remain. And every now and then, when I pass the refrigerator and see that little lighthouse magnet holding a child's note in place, I think about how easy it is for some people to confuse softness with surrender. They are not the same. They never were.